Okay, we're going to look at a quick example involving a couple different ways to utilize if and if-else statements. So we'll design pseudocode to assign a letter grade based on the following scale. So a score of 90% or greater is an A. A score greater than or equal to 80% but less than 90% is a B. Greater than or equal to 70 but less than 80 is a C. Greater than or equal to 60 but less than 70 is a D. And below 60 is an E. So we could do this problem in two different ways. First would just be a series of sequential if statements utilizing the AND, or the double ampersand, which represents AND. And then the second way is to utilize a series of if and else statements in combination. So in the first method, we're literally going to do each test in order. So if I write them out, it says if the score is greater than 90, you get an A. If the score is greater than or equal to 80 and the score is less than 90, grade equals B. We'll do this for each of the grades. If the score is greater than or equal to 70 and the score is less than 80, you get a C. If the score is greater than or equal to 60, and score is less than 70, you get a D. Else, the grade that you get is an E. So, there's nothing wrong with this method. It has the advantage of the user doesn't have to guess not the user. Anyone coming along to read the code can see very clearly what the criteria is under which the grade is received. In other words, it's literally just a reinterpretation of the original scale. But there's a better way to do this, and that's to use sort of sequential if and else statements. Second method, use a series of if and if-else statements. Okay. Down a little lower. So for doing that, second way of doing it is kind of like this last bit here. I don't have to say at the bottom that the score is less than 60. If they made it all the way to the bottom, that means they did not get A, B, C, or D, so they got an E. So it's a similar idea. It's just we're going to carry that on at each step of the process. So you can really do it either way. Let's start at the top. If your score is greater than or equal to 90, you get an A. And then instead of having another if statement, we'll say else if the score is greater than or equal to 80, you're going to get a B. So you won't get here if you have a score bigger than 90. So if your score is less than 80, we go to an else if your score is greater than or equal to 70. Now you'll get a C. Oops. Stop 1 second. Okay, sorry, I had some pen issues. If the score is greater than or equal to 70, you get a C, and then else if your score is greater than or equal to 60, you're going to get a D. And then at the bottom, else, again, I don't need an if statement here, your grade equals E. So this logic is a little cleaner, and it allows for less sort of, we didn't use the and statements. It's maybe a little harder for someone, most coders should be able to look at this no problem and see what's going on, because you don't get to the next else if statement unless the first if statement is false. So this might be a good place to look at a method that returns a grade, because we could use within each of these things, instead of assigning a grade, we could just return the grade. So why don't we go ahead and jump over to Eclipse and write a class called, do a new class over here called grade. Chapter 4. Calculator. And let's do a couple of things. Let's have it go ahead and ask the user for the input. So we'll go integer number equals get input from the user. And then we'll go string character. Let's make it a character. Character grade equals, we'll call a function called calculate grade, sending it that number. And then we'll output the results, sending both the number and the grade. So a couple of things, I'm going to need to import java.utility for the scanner. Then I want to go ahead and set up the method headers here. So let's see, the first one, get input, is going to return an integer and has no parameters. Just return 10 for now. Probably better to return -1 actually. Just to know that it's a default value of returning. Okay, and then the second thing is going to return a letter, public, or a character. It's called calculate grade. And again, I would suggest that you type along here. And if you need to pause the video at any time, just pause it and do this yourself and then check it against mine. That's one way to do it. It's getting an integer as a parameter. Just give it the same name. Or actually here, we'll call it the score. And then let's return a default grade of, in single quotes, E. Okay, and then output results. Doesn't return anything, public static void. It has an integer that's their score and a character that's their letter grade. Go ahead and write this method. With a score of your grade is, need a space before your, add in a period at the end. This would be a good place for the print formatting, so I'm going to come back and do that after, maybe in the next video, where we utilize the print formatting to format in the score and the letter grade. And actually, I think we could run this program right now. So because I've set it up so the logic is working, so we're calling get input, it doesn't do anything, just returns a -1. We're calling calculate grade, doesn't do anything, just returns an E. Then we're calling output results, which will say, with a score of -1, I would hope that your grade is an E. Okay, let's run it. With a score of -1, maybe we should put a comma after that. Your grade is E. Okay, so now we need to write those methods. Get input, we'll need a scanner. So notice I don't need the scanner anywhere else, so I can just define it within this function. Scanner console. If I needed this console somewhere else, I would maybe define it in main, but I'm not using it anywhere else. If I did define it in main, I would need to pass it in here as a parameter. We'll print asking for their score. Enter your score. And then we'll say, I can actually just, so I could have a score here that says, you know, I could have a line of code that says integer score equals console.next integer. And then return that score. I can save myself a variable because if I think of this method get input as an integer, that's the type that it's returning, then I don't need this temporary variable score. I can just return this console.next integer. Now, when would I not want to do that? I would not want to do that if I was testing whether or not this was some kind of valid input or not. I would probably want to do that within this method, or maybe around its method call. So we'll get into that as well. But for now, let's just return that value, console.next integer. And we should be able to run this method. Ooh, I got a 92. With a score of 92, your grade is E. Sad. But it got the input and it sent it to the next method, calculate grade. It just didn't calculate the grades correctly. So now we can go back to our pseudocode for this. I want to use this sort of nested, or not, they're not really nested. They're sequential if, else, if statements. So if score is greater than or equal to 90, so here I could say, again, have a variable character of type character and assign it the value A. Or if their score is bigger than 90, we could just return this A. And then I can say else if, it's not going to like that. So I'm going to need to nest it. Else and pause for 1 second. Okay, sorry. Else if, so if the score is greater than or equal to 80, we want to return a B. And then you get out of that else if statement. So So then I have another one down here, else if score is greater than or equal to 70, return C. Again, get out of that else if statement. Else if score greater than or equal to 60, return a D. And finally, I could just leave this return statement at the bottom because I don't actually even need another else here, because if one of the above statements is true, it will return from the method back to main A, B, C, or D. If it gets past this last else if, we want it to return E. So we don't need a final else statement here. We just can return E at the bottom. You could also put the else statement in. It's going to be the same code. Put a space in between those. You can kind of see this is a little hard to see on my, there it is. There's the whole method. If you need to pause that, you can. This might be an example where you might choose to go back and tighten these up. Well, no, I think I would leave them because, you know, what happens when you tighten that up is you kind of lose the semicolons oftentimes. So nothing wrong with leaving it like this, even though it takes a little more space. Run it. Enter your score, 56. With a score of 56, your grade is E. Run it again. Enter your score, 72. With a score of 72, your grade is C. Run it again. So this is the testing component. Enter a score of 0. The score of 0, your grade is E. You know, you should be testing some of the values that might not be expected. So 90, that should be an A. 80, 70, we should check those endpoints. 89, oh, what if I go 89.9, it's going to crash. Think about why. It's expecting an integer, and I entered in a double. So at some point, maybe in our instead of saying enter your score up here, it should say enter your integer score. And you can see this code is working. That is going to get a little bit into maybe the pre and post conditions of methods that we can talk about in chapter 5 as well. I don't know if I'll come back to this, but each of these methods could have conditions of what they're expecting as input and what, or precondition, and what it's expecting to happen at the end post condition. Okay, I'm going to separate those methods out. So main, get input, calculate grade, output results. Get input, literally just getting the input from the user. The trick there is that I'm just returning that input. I didn't assign it to a variable, just returned it. And then within calculate grade, I'm using successive else if statements, limiting the number of comparisons I have to do on the score. So if it's greater than or equal to 90, it returns an A and exits that method. Same thing then if it's bigger than 80, bigger than 70, it never gets down to the bottom unless they have a score that's less than 60, in which case it returns an E. And then finally output results. Again, that would be a good place for formatting, so maybe we'll come back to it in a minute.